My name is Miguel, this is Rush the Wash, and on this video I'm going to show you how using a cheap airbrush actually got me this guy. And this guy painted quite fast. Buckle up brush lickers because it's gonna be another wild ride. All this started very innocently when I was browsing through the equivalent of Amazon where I live. Somehow, this appeared in my feed. It was small, it was cheap, and it was recommended. Before I knew what was happening, I was looking at this thing on my desk. Now, I am not a master painter by any metrics, and I am an absolute noob for airbrushes. So if you are in my camp and you are sometimes wondering if this is for you, these are my very first impressions on airbrushing miniatures and an honest review on this item. Even before the parcel arrived, I had already watched a couple of YouTube videos on how to airbrush miniatures because I needed to know what the hell I was getting myself into. Of all those that I watched, I really liked Sumikito's video, which is comprehensive and detailed without going into the nonsensical explanations that I didn't really need to know to just paint a miniature. Simon gives the exact amount of information I need to feel confident enough to try anything myself. Now, what to paint? My infamous pile of shame provided. I had these two miniatures in a hiatus, waiting for a good opportunity to make a video with them. Well, this was that opportunity. Screw using some cheap stuff to get used to new techniques. We are going balls deep with a tool I have zero idea of how to use. What could go wrong?
I'm in danger!
For my first miniature painted with an airbrush, I am going to use a nowadays somewhat rare and kinda expensive miniature. This Dragon Ogre by Nick Beebe. Released in 1987 and originally painted by none other than our saint and savior, Mike Maffei. This mini I never planned learning how to use an airbrush with, but I'll be damned if fear is going to keep me from doing it. For my first task, I wanted to see how I could do base coats with the airbrush. Both miniatures I wanted to paint had been primed in white beforehand, as I intended using my traditional method. I have in my collection several air paints from Citadel, which I use for glazing when rushing the wash. They come in a consistency that I assume I just could put them in the pot and start painting. And painting I began doing. I used Mortarion Green, Calf Blue, and then I used some Citadel shades like Drakenhof Nightshade for, well, shading. First lesson I learned: you still need something to get the consistency to work better with the airbrush. Pro painters use different stuff out there to get the paint to flow better. What did I use? Windex. From my very limited experience, Windex works fine and is cheap. In fact, it worked much better than what I assume I will use more. Hey guys, what's up over there? This is Future Miguel, and I know way more than this moron who's talking to you right now. I'm gonna give you a disclaimer over here. There are many brands out there that people use for thinning their paints for airbrushes. I still swear by Windex, but believe me, I've been reading and there are a lot of different formulas that professionals use for doing this. So take everything of what I said with a big pinch of salt. Second lesson learned, now regarding the airbrush itself. I thought that it was a single action type. For those of you who are as clueless as I was a week ago, there are two main types of airbrushes: single action and double action. Single action means you can't control when the air stops coming out, which is what this is for. It turned out this one is a double action, where you can press or release the trigger to control the airflow. However, at the default setting straight out of the box, it works as a single action. If you want it to work as a double action, you need to attach this small gasket, but then it doesn't fit the air compressor. For this to actually work, I had to source these other components. When used as a double action, the compressor doesn't have a continuous release of air, and I am not very comfortable hearing the pressure go up inside that small black bottle. I will need to investigate further to know if this thing is fine pumping without release, but that is something I will do some of the day. The set straight out of the box, with its continuous air being released, you need to be careful as it could create the effect called spider webs, which is what happens when the paint on the surface you are painting is pushed outwards by the airflow. Learning the correct distance for applying paint without this happening was a little difficult at first, but not a deal breaker. It takes a little practice and you can avoid the effect by continuously moving the miniature. Regarding the compressor, it is super quiet, hefty, but not heavy, and it works just fine. I can't regulate the pressure on it, but it seems to work perfectly with these paints for doing base coats and even detailing a little bit with more concentrated shadowing. I kept it plugged in because the pressure stays stable and a little higher than if it was unplugged, although the booklet advises against it. The booklet also says that its max pressure is around 20 psi, and I'm not really sure about that because I don't have a way to test it, if it's true or not. However, the air goes through this small hole over here and gets compressed inside. The fact this is all it takes for it to work is honestly quite fascinating. I decided to go a little bolder with it. Using air colors is all nice and well, as they are basically formulated for this type of thing. But what about creating my own airbrush paints using regular paints? I took some paint from the pot, put it in the airbrush cup. I then dropped some flow improver and mixed everything in the pot, which in hindsight is a stupid move, as there are some particles in the paint, even in inks, that are dry and will clog the airbrush. Big mistake. Because of this, the airbrush started clogging and speckling, which are things that you really want to avoid. I cleaned it a couple of times with Windex, which is basically isopropyl alcohol, absolute anathema to acrylic paints, and therefore it was awesome for cleaning it. In fact, you can actually use it for improving the flow of the paint, and after some testing and getting several clogs, I started using this instead of the flow improver, and the results were much better. Not only that, it is way cheaper than the flow improver I was using anyways. I was learning some hard lessons with my first miniature. I was starting to feel more confident with my new tool, and now that I had finished working on my first miniature ever painted with an airbrush, I decided to move on to another, bigger one. This humongous beast from Mom Miniatures was next. An airbrush seems to be the perfect tool to working with bigger miniatures because you can paint those bigger areas faster without the dreaded pulling that you can get with contrast paints. It was from the very beginning that after having disassembled and cleaned the airbrush, I started having significant issues with it. I think it was my fault because I had pulled out the needle and maybe I didn't adjust it correctly, or maybe I had blunted the tip when putting it back. This is what I fear the most when using a new tool I am not familiar with. Luckily for us, anything you need can be found on the internet. I started reading online regarding issues with airbrushes, and I happened upon an interesting article that recommended polishing the needle. Polishing the tip of your airbrush is something not good for the faint of heart, so if you have an expensive one, maybe do that with a little bit of care. So I took it out, and using a power tool and a whetstone, I sharpened it, polished it, and crossed my fingers to see if this will fix the issue. The solution improved the flow a little bit, but not too much. I had been super careful with the cleaning and assembly of the airbrush, so I assumed there was a different issue. And after testing and retesting, I found out what it was. My mix and the way I was doing things. First of all, mixing in the cup itself is a stupid idea. Look at the crap I took out from it when it got clogged using white ink. Not paint, ink. This stuff will clog the very thin nozzle the airbrush has, so that is surely part of the problem. Secondly, I started using only Windex to thin the paints, and I saw a significant improvement. No more flow enhancer, this was all it was needed. Once I had laid down the main colors, it was now time to have fun with the detailing. For this I used my brush, painting some highlights with white, adding a gold trim using my newfound method, which you can check over here, glazing over where needed, decorating the base, and overall finishing the model up to a decent gaming standard. I can give you now my final impressions regarding airbrushing as a total noob. Let's begin with what I like. The first one, it's how easy it is to lay down colors and how they blend with each other. It is faster than brushwork, so saving time is definitely an upside of using an airbrush, but I think this is only applicable on batch painting or when you paint big miniatures like this guy. Because I don't have to spend that much energy laying down the base colors, then I can have fun with the detailing, which is what I enjoy the most on my miniature painting projects. Now, regarding the airbrush itself, although it looks chunky with that bottle underneath, it is quite comfortable to use. It doesn't make much noise, which for someone living in an apartment and who likes painting at night, it is a must. The size is definitely a plus when it comes to traveling. Imagine you have to paint some miniatures before a tournament or a convention and you need to get a unit painted at a hotel room, which I have seen some people doing. Well, with this and a few pots of paint and Windex, you can definitely do it. And because it uses a USB port charger, you can use your phone charger, which is double plus good. Now, on the other hand, these are the cons. Cleaning the airbrush is a chore. You need a place where you can do this properly, or at least I do. The good thing is I have a bathroom nearby my studio, so it is not a big deal doing it once or twice, but when you start changing colors quite often, it definitely adds up to the painting time. Also, some of the pieces are tiny. If you lose them, say goodbye to your airbrush. You better be prepared, because if anything goes down the drain, adios airbrush. To be honest, this is such a pain in the neck when a brush, a cup of water and some towels are more than enough for most paints. Airbrushes do need some special consideration and a little more careful planning. There are ways to make the workflow with an airbrush a little better. You also need to make sure you learn about the proper way to keep the thing in working condition. This is a must with any given tool, be it your regular brush, your craft knife, whatever. Having issues with clogging and painting spattering is not fun, and since this is a cheap tool, you can be a little caveman like me and try something as drastic as polishing the tip of the needle to make it sharper and less prone to what is called dry tip. After I did that, the airbrush worked better, but what it really was a game changer was not being stingy using Windex and getting better at mixing the paint. Last but not least, remember that spraying paint in a closed space is not the healthiest thing around. I could feel the air getting stuffy. I think having a mask is next in my shopping list for the sake of health, and this little munchkin will have to wait outside whilst the minis get painted this way. Overall impressions? I definitely am going to include airbrushing in my tool repertoire. Do I recommend buying one to learn with it? Yep, absolutely. It is cheap, it is rugged enough for you to make mistakes with it, and even if you don't like it or if it breaks because you use it wrong, it won't be a big loss compared to a full-blown, semi-decent kit. Is it something everybody should have? That depends on what your expectations are. For me, as I have been painting without one for so long, it doesn't feel absolutely essential, but I can definitely see its advantages. Has this whetted my appetite for a better airbrush? Well, let's say I have ordered a way better and more expensive airbrush, and I am excited to get my hands on it. As rushing paint jobs is something that I really enjoy doing, and it does help to keep publishing videos for you guys, I see its benefits and I'm definitely going to use it. Watch this next, like and subscribe, and remember, my name is Miguel, this is Rush the Wash, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Un beso. Adiós.